The desire of self is to know self. To know self, in truth, to truly know, is acceptance. That is acceptance. So it can also be said the desire of self is to accept the self fully. But in order to accept the self, in order to know the self has to see. It has to see the self. We can't accept what we cannot see. So it is that the denial of self is the denial not only of this desire, but the denial of source. There are infinite different words that can be used, and all of them are just words, and so we'll use a few. It is the same as God. It is the same as divine, the same as spirit, the same as the big self with a capital S. The denial of small self is the denial of big self, and vice versa. The denial of the broader self is the denial of small self. They are one and the same. They are the same. There is no difference, no division. There is nothing differing between man and God, the self and divine, expanded, spirit, source. There is no separation between creator and created. They are one and the same. To try to cleave the two is to live in delusion, is to live in a state of denial of what is. And denying what is, resistance to what is, generates suffering. Because again, at the core level, the desire is to see. To see clearly is to allow. To allow, as in allowing what is to hold no resistance, release resistance. And in the release of resistance, naturally, there is not suffering. So, what is so special about this realm? Because this is the realm where all of it is really happening. Yes, this is not all of reality. This is one teeny tiny sliver. It's a teeny tiny, limited, fragmented portion of reality. We call it the whole of reality. It's not. It's not. There are a great many more dimensions to reality than what is accessible here through the physical form. But all of those other levels, all those other dimensions of reality are accessible through consciousness, through the sensory experience of consciousness, which has its own perfectly intact vibrational senses, energetic senses. They're subtle, they're soft, and they're experienced internally. And so a significant portion of experiencing incarnation, experiencing life in this realm, from this dimension, is learning how to integrate the gross senses, the physical senses, and the subtle ones, the internal ones. But right there, that is the magic of this realm, because only in this realm, in the third dimension, as always, the power of three is illustrated. The third thing is the magical thing. It is only in this dimension that absolute clarity can be achieved. And absolute clarity can be achieved here because of the extreme contrast. The intensity of sensation in this realm is unparalleled. It doesn't exist anywhere else. This is as strong as sensation gets. This is as clear, as obvious. It is not more obvious than knock on wood. That is as real feeling as anything can become. And so the magic, the power, the beauty of this dimension of reality is in the profound and undeniable experience of contrast that is available here and only here. And by that contrast, which cannot be greater in any other place, in any other level of reality, there is not more contrast than this. By that, we gain such great clarity that here, self can see itself fully. Here, this is the place. This is where it happens. And again, that is the desire of self. That is what self wants. That's the core desire of all of this. Self naturally is creative and desires to create for the sake of creation. That is a natural expression of self. But the creation is the natural expression. The natural desire is to witness, is to see, is to experience, is for self to know itself. And again, knowing implies and contains automatically within it, because we're talking about clear knowing, we're talking about direct knowing, not conceptual knowing. The conceptual knowing of the mind is never without some dust, because the mind is a lens. The knowing of the mind contains judgment, it contains resistance, it is inherently skewed. So that's not the kind of knowing we're talking about. We are talking about the direct experiential knowing, the kind of knowing that is absolute and that contained within it inherently as a part of that experience is acceptance, is allowance. It is non-resistant because there is nothing else there. It's pure awareness. That's it. Nothing else clouding up this filter. No filter, in fact. It is unfiltered experience. That is knowing. I mean, it can't be argued. How can you know anything more directly than without filter? Yes? And so it is. That is how Source, Spirit, Self wishes to see itself, without the filter, clearly, directly. And in this experience, in this realm, this is where we have the opportunity as self, as Source, to embody ourself. It is a great magical game where first we are entranced with the external, but in the searching through external, we are denying the self. Again, we are denying the personal experience of self, and we are not fulfilled. And so we are driven by that sense of dissatisfaction to seek within. In seeking within, we discover the internal self, but we begin to reject the external. We call it illusion. We call it Maya. We decry and besmirch it. And so again, we are rejecting self. But we have done something important. We have reconnected with the internal sense, with the self as one. The self as I. The self as me, even. Now, in connecting with this, because before we were disconnected from it, we were disembodied in seeking the self everywhere other than within this body. We could not find it. Now we are finding self within this form, and we are allowing it to be. In order to see clearly, we have to be. We have to be present. We have to be looking in order to see. In order to really be the self, because again, to see the self, you must be the self. To be the self, you must allow. It's not a doing. It is not doing. To be, we must allow. To allow means to release the resistance to what is, which means to release the mind. To surrender. When we surrender to what is and begin to inhabit it directly, experientially, the mind falls away. It is not a removal, it is a release of mind. As the mind is surrendered, the filter falls away. We begin to be. We begin to inhabit. We become truly real for the first time. And in our becoming real, in our embracing of this experience of inhabiting and being, dwelling within this physical form, there we become self fully. Because again, you have to be the self in order to see the self. In becoming self fully, we start to experience. We experience self. We experience the self as one. We experience the self within this form, within this body. And then something really magical happens. Because we have become fully the authentic, entire expression of the self as one within this body. Now we are looking with the clear vision of that self, the clear vision of source. Because we have embraced the small self, we become the big self. They merge as one, and now that we are looking as source, as the full self with full knowledge and awareness, we are able to see clearly, for the first time, the fullness of self. Now that we have become the self as one, by looking within, we direct that same gaze without, and we see the self as all, in totality, in clarity, without the filter, without the obfuscation of mind, no clouding, nothing between, no screen, nothing separating. By becoming the self as one, we are actually able to experience clearly and fully and directly for the first time the self as all. And now we are self knowing self directly, experientially, absolutely, accepting self, allowing self, aware purely of self. And what naturally arises from that experience, what is inspired by that, is love, is adoration and awe and exaltation. Now the self as one is seeing the self as all and is awed by it, is inspired by it. It naturally arises. It just emanates. There can be nothing there but that. The clear gaze of source is the loving gaze of absolute witness. And now the self as one is seeing the self as all clearly in its perfection, in its glory, in its beauty, and it drops to its knees in worship of this. Because there simply is no other response. This is the natural response. To say, oh, God, how glorious this. And the self as all, receiving that witness, feeling that witness, becomes conscious of itself and what is taking place here. And it, again, it too naturally reflects back this same response, because it is the natural response for self to see self in its totality, in its true wholeness, which can only be experienced from this realm. The response is exaltation, is awe, is worship. So the self as one sees the self as all, and falls to its knees and prays, and the self as all, being seen and seeing back, reflects in perfection, in exact reciprocation, naturally, this same sensation, this same experience, this feeling of exalting and being exalted and exalting. For the exaltation, it is this mutual, complete circuit of adoration, of exaltation, of worship. It is self-worshipping self, because self is so good it cannot do anything other than that. There could be no other sensation. It is what most naturally and powerfully arises, and it is known most powerfully because of the experiences in this realm of reality. It is here. It is here that self, what we are, comes to know self with absolute clarity. Only here. And in knowing that, worships self, adores self. The lover and beloved are united. This is the love that we are intended to experience and to express. This is the greatest desire of the self, which we are. To know the self and experience the absolute unconditional acceptance, adoration, and worship of that self in mutuality. That is what the Song of Solomon is about. That is what all of everything is about. It's this. It's this. Because when self meets the eyes of self, and that is all that it wants, that is all that it wants, it knows it is complete. It is loved and loving. It is lover and beloved united, and eternally in embrace, lying eternally in the arms of one another, gazing eternally into the eyes, the depths of one another. That is that soul witness, that absolute clear vision, 360 degrees. That is what it is to know the self, to know divine, to know God. Again, whatever word you want to put on it, it doesn't matter. That is the state of being that has been called nirvana. It has been called heaven. That's what it is. It was never a place, it was always a state, and it's accessible here. This is where we know it in its fullness, in absolution. And everything here is glorified in that. I cannot express this fervently enough. It is all so good. It is all so immaculate. And it is all exactly as it should be. So it is.